Hello, everybody. We are live
Hi.
for another Evolving HR webinar. This is one, I think I say this every single one, but this is one that I have been really, really looking forward to hosting because I think this is a subject that we don't talk about enough, that we don't understand well enough. And I'm hoping that by the end of this next hour, everybody who's listening will go away understanding a little bit more about it and having a better idea of what options are available to you as an HR professional. So before I introduce my wonderful expert panel today, I just want to talk about, I did a little poll on LinkedIn yesterday, just to see, just to kind of canvass views on what people do right now when it comes to getting emotional support for themselves in their HR roles. And the four options I gave to people were, because I think the question was, who do you turn to for emotional support? And the four options were your line manager, a coach or therapist, a trusted colleague or friend, and no one. I just get on with it. Does anybody want to hazard a guess on which was the most popular answer in that survey?
Number 4.
It was actually second. So 51% of people said that they lean on a trusted colleague or friend.
Right. Yeah.
31% said no one. I just get on with it. So that's 82% already.
Wow.
12% said a coach or a therapist, and 6% said they talk to their line manager. 6%.
Wow.
It's not. I'm not surprised.
It's worrying that, isn't it?
It is. It's disappointing. So let you guys introduce yourselves before we get into our conversation today. So I'll go clockwise on my screen. Jo Burrell, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Dr. Jo Burrell. I'm a clinical psychologist, a coach, researcher, and a supervisor. And I co-founded a company called Ultimate Resilience, following a 20-odd year career in the NHS. And we've been delivering kind of workplace wellbeing solutions for the past 10 years or so. And in the last couple of years, we've become particularly interested in the mental well-being of HR professionals. We've run a survey for 2 years running now. Our report for this year's survey is out very shortly. And we are now delivering HR supervision.
Wonderful. Joanne.
Me. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Joanne Wells, and I'm actually a HR consultant. I run a small HR consultancy called Privilege HR in Bury, which is Greater Manchester. So I support businesses with all their HR needs, the businesses that don't have HR on site. But I'm also a qualified counsellor. Started my training about 5 or 6 years ago, qualified a couple of years ago. And a bit like what Jo was saying, sort of really interested in this well-being space around HR and HR professionals, because through personal experience, I recognise that there isn't always that support there for HR themselves and that emotional support when we need to offload. As a counsellor, I received clinical supervision, but as a HR professional, I didn't and don't, or didn't, should I say. And so that's why I'm really interested in this space and building a network of people that support us, support our HR sector, because I think we deserve it.
I do not disagree with you. And Claire, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would, yes. So hi, everybody. I'm Claire Roberts, and my business is HR for HR. My background, big corporate, successful HR career, 25 kind of plus years, and it ended dramatically in 2018 when I hit a massive burnout brick wall. And my experience of that, having worked, big global companies, living a kind of like HR rock star lifestyle, was that there was just nothing there. There was no support for me. I was actually told, well, you're in HR, you're not the same as other employees. And I'd worked there for a very long time. And I just kind of thought, after my employment ended with them in a mutually beneficial way, I just kind of kept kind of thinking, like, this is not okay. Like, where do HR go? Like, who's there to support HR? So that was my driving force to create HR for HR, which does what it says on the tin, provides effectively our amazing, underestimated profession with the same care, love and support that we in HR provide to other people. And I'm massively passionate about clinical supervision for our profession. The biggest part of my business is that I'm actually a coach most of the time, and I do consultancy as well, but it is more coaching. I have supervision as a coach, but I also choose to have clinical supervision. It was part of my burnout recovery. I didn't really realize what it was at the time, if I'm honest. I was actually having CBT, and then he actually suggested, I think we're ready to move now into clinical supervision. I was like, what are you talking about? And it was literally like the biggest light bulb moment. And I just kind of went, yeah, okay, why are we as a profession not being offered this as absolute standard? So that's why I'm here. I am a coach, and it's very different. I'm sure we'll go on to that. Massive advocate because of what we deal with, and it's the invisible stuff that we don't really talk about and showcase. So really grateful to be here talking on such a subject I'm so passionate about. So thank you.
And it's interesting what you said there, Claire. I think you kind of nailed it for a lot of people. I think a lot of people don't know what clinical supervision is. And if you've only ever worked in a corporate environment in HR, and because we don't receive it typically, why would you know what it is? I mean, maybe if you work in an organization that has therapists or counselors or professions that actually do have supervision, then you might know what it is. So I guess that's where I want to start with this is, what are some of the misconceptions that you see that people have about supervision, and what do you think stops people from looking into it? Is it that lack of understanding, or is it something else? And I'll come to you first. Shall I call you Dr. Joe, or shall I call you Joe and Joanne? How should we do this when we've got two Joannes? Two Joes.
Just call me Joe, it's fine.
I'll be Joanne.
If you want to call me Dr. Joe just to help for the distinction, that's fine too.
Joe, let me ask you
your
that.
doctor stripes, we should call you doctor, don't you?
So, Joe, I mean, what are your thoughts around misconceptions about supervision?
I think the main one is, I guess, our kind of traditional concept of a supervisor is someone who kind of stands over you and monitors your work and checks that you're meeting all your targets. It's a kind of managerial role, really. It's like the next rung up, isn't it, from you in the managerial sort of hierarchy. And but in my mind and my experience of having supervision and delivering supervision, it's definitely not that. And actually, we would see it as best practice to not have supervision from someone who is also your manager.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, it does happen sometimes, and it certainly happened for me in my NHS career because of course there's limited resource, but there's a way that you can negotiate and set up that relationship that ensures that you are really clear about the distinctions between your person who's being your manager who is also your supervisor. So I think that's a big misconception, and I think that it's unfortunate because people think of this kind of overseer, person who monitors, and actually they then don't see the hugely beneficial aspects of supervision, which are much more about being alongside, about guidance, about support, about development, professional development, and all of those things. So people don't see that. They're blind to those things because they think of that first, that management type role. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions.
And let me, I would agree. I think the word is, just it's a misleading word because of what we use it for
isn't
in
it?
a different context. Why don't we just cut to the chase? What is it? What is clinical supervision? And Joe, I'll stick with you on this one. I'll stick with you on this one. I am going to come to Claire and Joanne as well, but because I'm interested in both of your experiences too of receiving supervision. But Joe, how would you define supervision in a clinical context?
So it might be worth me talking a bit about my own experience of supervision through my career, because I've been receiving and delivering supervision for almost 30 years, and in my profession it's seen as a non-negotiable. It's a thing that you receive and you learn from the moment you start training, and it is there to support you in your professional development, but also in your personal development. So it's there in acknowledgement of the fact that the work that you're doing as a clinical psychologist is going to have an emotional impact on you. It's going to be emotionally challenging, so it's there in acknowledgement of that impact. So it's a space in which you can process and talk about and think about that impact. And of course, it's very different for different people and at different times in their lives and so on. But it's also there as a source of professional development. So it's a place where you learn from a supervisor or a group, or in a group setting. Supervision can be delivered one-to-one, or it can be delivered in a group. And we indeed now do both in our HR supervision that we're providing. It's a place where you learn your trade. You learn your skills and techniques. You develop yourself. And certainly the research says that it has all sorts of benefits. It brings all sorts of benefits in terms of things like self-awareness, efficacy in terms of your role, ethical decision making. It improves your ethical decision making. So it brings all sorts of benefits. But to your question, because I think there's a thing about how do we distinguish between all of these different types of personal and professional development. And I think, they're not completely distinct from one another.
Exactly.
There are clearly some shared, techniques that are used, but I think there are some ways of distinguishing between them. So, therapy and coaching is something, and I've done all three of them. I do different guises in my life. Therapy and coaching are often short-term, time limited. You go to them because you've got something going on in your personal life, because you're experiencing some sort of distress. So that's therapy and counselling, not coaching. And then coaching is often very goal orientated. You go to coaching because you have something you want to achieve, or maybe a problem you want to solve. Again, it's often time limited. And those are both approaches that you might access outside of work. Coaching more so in work too. And then supervision is very work focused. So I would never have experienced or deliver supervision outside of work. It's about work. It's focused on your work functioning and your experience at work. So it's very much about work. And it is also intended to be ongoing. So I've received supervision for almost 30 years. So it's meant to be an ongoing thing. It's not meant to be time limited. What we offer at the moment is time limited, because you've got to start somewhere in HR, haven't you? You can't go along and say, here I am, I'm going to deliver supervision to your HR professionals forever. They're probably not going to buy it. So currently we're doing it short term, but it's meant to be, delivered over the longer term. And that means it serves a kind of preventative function, as well as addressing people's difficulties in work, their challenges, and growing their, technical skills.
Yeah. So Claire, let me come to you, because you are a coach and you have also received supervision. So what would you add to that in terms of the difference between the two?
So I think really absolutely agree with everything Dr. Joe has just said. I love saying Dr. Joe, just thought I'd say that. And I think that, from my own kind of personal experience, when we were kind of just having a quick chat before we went live, I kind of shared that as part of my burnout recovery, I was having CBT, and that actually my therapist, we got to a point where he actually suggested, I think we're ready to move from that type of counselling and therapy to clinical supervision. And I think that I was really fortunate in that he had the experience, background, qualifications and knowledge to be able to do that pivot. And I would ask Jo if that is, I didn't believe that it was an automatic thing. Someone that can do CBT doesn't necessarily have the skills and availability and the background and qualifications to be able to then do clinical supervision. They're obviously different. And I think for me, my personal experience was the amount of safety that is being created, and I think that's where there is some crossover a little bit. I'm very clearly a coach. I've done counselling qualifications as well, so the skills and the mindset and who I am and my personality, they all naturally kind of meld together. But there's something about the safety in the clinical supervision that I have in order to be authentically, emotionally myself. And there's no, I would hope there's no judgment in any of those three disciplines. But there's something very much around the long term, I think, Jo, when you were just explaining then around the difference. So yeah, I might see a client maybe for a year or so, sometimes a bit more with my coaching clients, but I've been having clinical supervision since 2018, every month, non-negotiable. And I think it's that, for me personally, it's like that emotional safety. I can share my deepest, darkest, they are dark sometimes, thoughts and opinions and some of the stuff I've been dealing with. There's nobody else I would share that with. Would be able to kind of go, oh, hang on a second, Claire, should we unpack that a little bit? Should we, delve into, why it is that's had such an impact on you over a different client that had no impact? So I think for me, there's something around the safety, but I definitely agree on the terminology. Definitely the whole supervision. Definitely, I think terminology has a massive impact. Yeah. As I shared again earlier, there's the invisible work that never goes away in our profession. So those 5-minute phone calls that end up being, emotionally impactful. We have a very unique role in every business. No other department in a business deals with the same level, anywhere close to the same level of emotional impact that we in HR do. No one, finance, procurement, sales. So I ask myself, why is it not automatic? Why is it not as automatic as other professions that it's just normal? It's just given. It's like a no-brainer. You wouldn't even consider it not to be offered. And that's where I hope that by people like us talking and sharing about the benefits, that our profession sits up and smells the coffee, frankly.
I totally agree. And then, Joanne, from a therapy perspective, what would you add in terms of the difference between the two from what you see, and when might it be useful for somebody to do therapy versus supervision?
I think for me, I just wanted to pick up on what Claire was saying first of all, though, about why there's nothing, or why we don't necessarily take or automatically provide something for HR. Why don't we think of HR in the same way as we do other professions or other caring professions? And this is a talk for another day, but I think HR is still just seen as that admin function, aren't they? I don't think there's so many organisations or there's so many business leaders that don't actually realise just the impact that HR can have an organisation, does have in an organisation, and what emotional burden they do take on, and they see them very much as perhaps just a people function. But maybe that's a conversation for another day. But in terms of therapy, for me, and where I think that therapy can come in and really dovetail into what Jo and what Claire are saying, is that, as Jo was describing in particular, as a person-centred counsellor, I will support HR professionals in the immediate term, in the here and now. Perhaps they've got a specific issue that they're really struggling with. Perhaps they've been in HR for 10, 15, 20 years. They've dealt with hundreds of redundancy programmes, but for some reason, this latest one has got them, it's triggered them, it's done something, and they're going. Not quite perhaps they're at burnout. Not quite, perhaps they're emotional collapse, but they need something. They need somewhere safe where they can go and say, do you know what? I do not feel right. I feel upset. I feel scared. I don't know what I'm doing. I've got imposter syndrome. Oh my God, I'm taking these people's jobs away from them, and this catastrophizing. So I think for therapy, certainly for me anyway, this is why I then qualified as a counsellor. It was having that immediate safe space to go and talk. So I don't want to talk to somebody about my workload. I've got my HR colleagues to help me with that, and my operational queries, or can you help me with this particular case, and can you help me with the financial, the legal interpretation of that? I'm okay with that. But where can I go to say, I feel really shit about just doing that to somebody. I feel really responsible. And I shouldn't be feeling responsible because I'm trying to do a good job. But you do. Because you know what? We're human beings as well. We're not immune to this shit. We're not immune to it at all. But I think once you get into HR, people think that that's it. You're some sort of ice queen, emotionless department that says you can and can't do that. Somebody at your conference gave me a thing that says my name's not HR.
Yeah, the crux of it, we're seen as a department or a function. We are not seen as individuals. And I joke about this on LinkedIn, but I was introduced to somebody at a wedding once as HR.
As HR.
Not Kirsty, this is HR. I'm like, I get nasty when people spell my name wrong, but that wasn't even close. I mean, there's an R.
That wasn't even your name.
But it was two people from my organization got married, and it was a small company. So pretty much the whole company was invited to this wedding, and somebody introduced me to their husband as HR. And my ex-partner that I was there with at the time was like, what the hell just happened? I'm like, yeah, I know. Yeah. It's a wedding.
And you're not identified as a person in yourself.
Inseparable from your job title, which is absolutely ridiculous. And you and Claire have both touched on a few things there. So why is it, like, I don't know how to phrase this. I don't know what the reason is, but as HR professionals, we are expected to kind of hold space for everybody else's breakdowns and problems and troubles and disciplinaries and all sorts of things. But nobody ever asks us how we're doing.
I've got a view on that if you want me to share.
I would like you to share that view, please, Claire. Yes, because it's a bit messed up.
It is absolutely, messed up is not the word I would use. I'm not sure how frank and expressive I can be on these calls.
Joanne's already said shit twice, so you may as well just go with it.
Okay, fine.
How fucked up it is. The F's come out now. The F's come out. So I think that one of the biggest reasons why people don't ask HR how they are, it isn't because they don't care, right? So a lot of us within our HR profession, we take it personally. We think they don't give a shit about HR. I honestly think that they kind of do, but they are so shit scared of HR being honest and going, actually, I'm really struggling. And actually, I'm not a well-being at the moment. And actually, I'm on the cusp of, burnout, or guess what, my elderly mother has just fallen down the stairs, or my dog's just bitten someone, or we are human beings. Forget HR. We are human beings first. And we are also employees a lot of the time within an organization. So my honest belief is that people within the business outside of HR are so grateful that they have someone to go, oh, thank God, give it to HR, including managers who actually should really be a bit of a conduit for some of this stuff before it comes to us. We tend to be the shit shovelers and the mopping uppers, if that's even grammatically correct. But you get my vibe. Hey, I'm on a roll now. I think they are so grateful it's not them having someone say, have you got 5 minutes, Claire? And I go, yeah, of course I have. Of course I have for you, Freddie. And Freddie saying that, last night he felt like taking his own life. Well, someone is going to be far more grateful for you being on the receiving end of that 5 minute, which then turns into 5 hours, 5 days, 5 months, 5 whatever of support. I think they're just so grateful they haven't got to do it because they're not necessarily naturally built. I think our profession really attracts people who are highly empathetic, probably empaths. That's one of my biggest realizations of my burnout, was actually realizing, wow, I'm a massive empath. We genuinely, like human beings, most of us in HR, there's times when take them or leave them. But, you know, I think we genuinely have
debatable.
We have a natural ability. There's a certain kind of character and person and values and personality that gets attracted to work in people professions. So not just HR, but other wider people professions. And that's why I just kind of go, well, that, you know, social workers, they get clinical supervision, you know, people in the NHS, they get, so I'm kind of, well, it's a people profession. Take the role of HR away, we're actually dealing with really serious things.
Not just admin.
Not just admin, right? And I think that's my honest view, is that there's genuinely people who don't give a shit about HR. We are, you know, policies with the fun police, human remains, you know, we've all been called these things, right? And so there is definitely that element, but my genuine feeling is that business owners, managers are so grateful they haven't got to deal with the emotional stuff, that they just don't want to know how we are, because if we fall over, who's going to do it?
But then I also wonder as well, you know, Claire, but I also wonder as well whether even if we were asked, and let's be honest, it might be the different answer now, but back when we were in house, if somebody came to us and asked us how we were, what would we say?
Fine.
It's okay. All right. It's fine. Don't you worry. You know. And
it's a bugbear for me. Fine. And I've got a thing about if I ask someone how they are and they say fine, I ask them about 2 or 3 more times, and if they keep thinking fine, I'll take that as a sign they don't actually want to talk. But you know, fine is the worst word you could possibly give me personally as an answer. If I ask you how you are, and if someone asks me now, hey, being radically self-aware, I never say that word. Because I'm not ever fine. I'm either amazing, or I'm feeling a bit tired, or I'm a bit. So I think we just tick box.
Yeah.
Joe, go for it.
I mean, obviously, I'm not an HR professional. It's very clear. But I suppose as an outsider looking in, these are, you know, what Joanne and Claire have been talking about chimes with me, because I see it, you know, I see what you're talking about in all the people who, you know, contact me and, you know, and talk to me about their experiences. And it made me realize, as I got to understand the culture of HR and the profession and people in it, it made me realize that having supervision, how important it was, how the presence of supervision in my profession served as an acknowledgement, an explicit acknowledgement of the fact that this work is tough. Do you know what I mean? This work is going to affect you. It's going to have an emotional impact on you. Just the presence of it, the fact that it exists in my profession, speaks that. And I actually hadn't quite, you know, the penny hadn't quite dropped until I saw a profession that's dealing with some very similar things, but doesn't have it. And so it made me realise that the lack of something there, of a system of support, a proper, you know, clear, robust system of support, serves to suggest there is no need in the first place. Do you know what I mean? And I think that it's a problem now, particularly because the profession has really changed over you know, over the decades, hasn't it? The scope of the role has changed massively. The pressures have increased hugely with the way the world is at the moment. You know, pandemic and onwards has been horrendous for HR. I can see that. And so the need has risen, but the culture of the profession hasn't shifted to acknowledge that need and to take account of it, you know. Absolutely. And I agree. I think there's a really important point that you make, Claire, about the kind of shutting the shutters and going, oh, they're dealing with it, we don't have to worry about it. We just stick our fingers in our ears and go, I think we don't have to open that Pandora's box of shit, what do we do about this? You know,
I agree. I think there's definitely that. If they're not doing it, then who's going to? And absolutely. I think there's also an element of, if you've always been the strong one and you can't be strong,
absolutely,
then I don't know what to do. And I like it. Sorry, there's drilling happening next door to me. I hope it's not too loud. My neighbours are.
Oh, that was brilliant.
You can hear it, can you?
Brilliant. Yeah.
Oh, damn it. Yeah, they've been doing it all day, and it's been quiet for about an hour. I think about it because I think about my role in my family, oldest daughter of 3, I've always been the one that's been there for everybody else.
Yep.
And when I hit burnout in 2014, I couldn't be there for anybody. I couldn't even be there for myself. And the rest of my family didn't know what to do because they didn't know me other than in the role of the one that looks after everybody else. And so I think there might be an element of that to it as well, possibly.
Yeah. It's like being the mum.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes. Exactly that.
Yeah.
I mean, annoying, really, isn't it? But
So I can relate to that, Kirsty. I'm the eldest. I'm the eldest grandchild, so I'm the eldest in my generation. So I'm the eldest of the cousins. So I'm and the gap between me and the next generation is only about, I think it's 5 or 6 years or something. So it's a really weird role to have. It's a different conversation, but it's a weird role to have, isn't it? You're expected to be,
and we get used to people's roles. That's what we do. I can remember again in 2014 when I reached burnout. I was off work for about 9 weeks, and I remember messaging my CEO and saying, like, I think I'm ready to return to work, but I'd like to do a graduated return. What do you think? And he went, well, I don't know. You're the one that usually does all of this.
Yeah.
He said, why don't you just write something? So I had to write my own return to work plan. And I was like, I'll just come in half a day a week, you know.
I was going to say an hour a week for 12 months. That sounds about right.
No reduction in salary. That'd be great. But yeah, so it was that sort of experience for me was really weird as well. And I don't know. Yeah, I think it's partly the HR thing and partly the, hang on a second, you're stepping out of your normal role. This is, I don't understand. Like, we don't know what to do with you when you're not in charge of everybody. So let's talk a little bit about the kind of emotional and psychological tolls that HR professionals are carrying that quite often we aren't able to talk about, and what happens to that kind of toll if it's not dealt with over time or if it's not processed properly. And Joanne, I'll come to you first on that.
I mean, if I may, then I'll share. I don't mind sharing a personal experience, and that's okay to share. But on a personal note, in 2017 I lost my mum. We lost my mum really suddenly, and it was catastrophic. Still is to this day. The loss of my mother is immeasurable. And where I was working at the time, and I won't say where, but where I was working at the time were less than supportive. And as a result, I just buried it. And what it led to about 6 months later was essentially a breakdown. I think probably what I now understand, probably burnout, actually. I'm not sure, if I'm being really honest. But all I know is that I got to the point about 6 months later when I just couldn't carry on. And horrifically was being performance managed in my job because I wasn't functioning. So I was horrified. I mean, it's, you know, so to answer that question, what's the toll? Personal struggles, mental health issues, whatever we want to call them, happen to us as well. And when we don't get that support, when I didn't get that support, I just buried it because don't forget, I've just told you I'm the eldest daughter, you know, as well. And I had my brothers to think about, I had my dad to think about, I had probably other people that I had my job, and my husband to think about, my kids to think. My kids were so upset about losing their grandmother and all this kind of stuff. And so you just put it all down because you're the one that's holding everything together. And then eventually you're not. And everyone's like, what do we do now? Fortunately, my family and friends are incredibly supportive, apart from the employer. But that's the answer. It does eventually get you. You know, we're not immune. So if you're not processing it, so if you apply that then to something that you're dealing with in the workplace, and you've dealt with somebody like Claire says, coming to your door and expressing a desire to, you know, harm themselves, or that they might be contemplating taking their own life, you take that on. And if they've not got a release, then what's going to happen to them? So you have to let them release it to you, but then what do you do with it? And that's why it's so important for us to have supervision, to be able to have that release ourselves. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Yeah. I mean, Joe, what would you add to that in terms of if people don't, if these tolls go unprocessed over a long period of time, how do you see that play out?
Burnout, compassion fatigue, moral injury. I mean, the list is endless. And, you know, I know you've done a wellbeing survey recently. I did, you know, we've done our mental wellbeing survey recently. There's some, you know, some crossovers in terms of our results, I know. But certainly the findings of ours suggest, you know, incredibly high rates of burnout, high rates of clinical depression, anxiety, poor well-being. I mean, it's absolutely plain, you know, that people in the profession are suffering significantly. And that is the toll, isn't it? That is the ongoing toll of people having to deal with this incredibly...
You explain what moral injury is? Somebody's just asked in the chat. I don't know the answer to that either, sorry.
I'm going to close my blinds.
One of the things that, you know, I'm going to backtrack slightly and just say, you know, as I got to understand and know HR professionals and their work, I was just absolutely astonished that there wasn't a system of support in place for them because of the, you know, the level of, you know, complexity and emotionally challenging stuff that they have to deal with. You know, so they're on the receiving end of all sorts of traumatic and difficult, you know, information. They're in a very precarious, you know, position in terms of like in between the management and the employees. It's like, whose side are you on? There's that whole thing going on, isn't there? And I think that sometimes leads to moral injury. So as a representative of the organisation, you're charged with doing things that you might not actually feel are morally right.
Exactly.
And that causes a conflict for you as a professional person.
Yeah.
You know that decision that you're making is having an impact on a person or people. You know, whether it's
it might be legally correct.
Yeah,
it might
absolutely.
be legally
you're
correct.
Following the law, but absolutely, and in some cases you're not. You know, I know that that's also happening for lots of HR professionals. They're saying this is not legal, but they're being told they have to do it anyway. But there is, you know, that experience of having to act in a particular way which you know is damaging to people. And that's what causes moral injury. You know, that's what leads to that feeling of conflict and distress, which can then lead to depression, anxiety, burnout, etc. It's just another one of those contributing factors. So, and I just, like I say, I think I just was totally taken aback to find that HR professionals are dealing with this level of stuff. I mean, delivering bad news, being the bad guy, you know, that's the one, isn't it? Being the one that everyone comes to when there's no solution to something and being expected to just have the answer, you know, and like, I get some of that because I've been that person too in my job, you know, that's why it resonates so much for me, you know, and even though I'm not an HR professional, it's like a lot of that I understand, I know what that feels like, you know, but I had a system of support in place. I had somewhere I could go to and say, I've been viewed as a bad person here, or I've had to tell someone something really difficult or you know, unpleasant for them, or I've had to listen to someone talk about something really traumatic and disturbing. I had somewhere to take that stuff, and that meant I could leave it at work. I could go home and recover and, you know, use my spare time as space to recover from work, which is what it's meant to be.
Exactly.
You know? And if you don't have that space to process and to deal with it, then it leaks into your everyday life. You're waking up at night, you're drinking too much, you know, you don't want to go out and see people, you shut yourself away, you know, all sorts of stuff happens. So,
I can think of a situation in my career, and I've talked very openly in previous webinars actually about, so I had two colleagues 10 years apart who passed away by suicide. And on both occasions that took place at our office. And I couldn't believe that it was happening again the second time, because it was the exact same thing. And that's always one of the ones that jumps out for me as being a time where I could have really done with somebody to talk to, because I was being expected to navigate a grief process for an entire organization. I was in a standalone role, navigate a grief process for an entire organization of about, we were tiny, 35 people, but it was the CEO that had passed away. And I sat next to him in the office, and he was the reason that I took that job, because he was absolutely wonderful chap. But nobody ever thought for 1 second that I might be bothered by the fact that this person had done, well, that had happened. They just wanted me to make sure everybody else was okay. And so that incident has triggered so much for me in terms of what I'm doing now. And that incident is actually the reason we're having this conversation and why it became a topic that I wanted to talk about. But, you know, that's an extreme example. There are so many other things that I have encountered that stayed with me. Yeah. You know, I just the most bizarre things. There was a lady I worked with once many years ago, and her brother had a stillborn child, which was absolutely heartbreaking. Well, her brother's wife did. And she sent a photo of the child round to everybody. And people were like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. And so everybody's forwarding it to me. I must have had about 17 versions of this same photograph. And I was like, this is really upsetting. And I had to take her aside and have a word with her. And she was neurodivergent. She had Asperger's syndrome, and to her, it was completely fine to share this photograph, and you know, because that was how they were grieving as a family. But you know, it's things like that. You're like, that was a half an hour of one day in my job, and yet here we are. When did that happen? That would have been about early 2000s. I'm still remembering.
Why was the assumption made that you would know how to deal with that?
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah. You're the people person, aren't you? So it's like automatic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Who else would you have gone to?
What's one of the problems is there's a sort of set of unspoken expectations that go on that lead to, that kind of conspire to a situation where you're placed in a position that is actually really unreasonable, you know, and unacceptable, but everyone just expects that that's okay, and because everyone expects it's okay, you just you deal with it and you get on with it, don't you? And actually, absolutely, you know, something like supervision is exactly why, you know, it's exactly the right thing for that type of scenario. It's like you were the only one dealing with something that was horrendous, and no one was expecting to look after you or look out for you or ask you how you are.
No, just sort this out, make it stop.
Yeah. Or you end up going home and sharing something like that, for instance, or something else with your wife or your husband or whatever, friends, whatever, parents, whatever it might be, and they've no idea how to. The response you get back is, I know when I try to talk about things at home, the response you get is a very protective response, so almost like a defensive response. So my husband might get quite defensive because I've been upset. Somebody's upset me at work. Somebody's burdened me. And so I go home and I'm upset. And it's not that I'm upset because I'm angry upset because I've been hurt, if that makes sense. I'm upset because of what I'm dealing with. But his natural response is to want to protect me and say, that's not right, and they don't do that to you, and he rears up. And then I get defensive and saying, no, it's not like that. And it doesn't work. So having a supervisor, going to supervision, or a therapist, or even a coach, depending on what it's about, but having that somebody, that safe space, who then is going to say, are going to help you unpick things, as Jo said at the beginning, having that experience to ask certain questions about certain things in a certain way so that you can unpack what this is doing to you, how it's making you feel, why do you feel like this, why is it triggering you, that's very different. And your parents and your husbands and your wives and your brothers and sisters are not qualified to do that.
Yes,
you know,
and that is exactly what I thought when I saw the poll results on LinkedIn yesterday, that you've got 82% of people either talking to a trusted friend or colleague who isn't qualified to deal with what you're telling them, or not doing anything at all. And that's concerning because, you know, and somebody put a comment in the chat there about a really supportive partner. And, you know, my husband's amazing. I can talk to him, but he shouldn't have to take that on. And he isn't qualified to help me navigate it.
Correct.
So that's a big thing. It's like, you know, sometimes there are conversations that we need to have with people who are qualified to have them.
Exactly.
And we can't just assume that because somebody because it's somebody we love or somebody that cares about us, that they're going to be able to help us in the right way.
Correct.
And it puts them in quite a difficult position sometimes as well.
Yes.
It does. Yeah, it does.
There's something
really
about the impartial role of a supervisor that's really important for that reason, you know,
100%.
because obviously you've already got an existing relationship with your partner or your husband or your friend or your sister or whoever it is that you might talk about. And, you know, bringing this stuff into the mix could complicate that. And there's all sorts of kind of existing dynamics and all that kind of stuff going on. With a supervisor, it's like it's a protected space. This is what I'm here for. I'm here to listen to you and to process with you and to think about this thing that's happened. And then we go away and we go our separate ways. We don't have a relationship outside of supervision. You know, I'm not cooking your tea when you come home in the evening. You know, I'm not, you know, do you know what I mean? We're not lying next to each other in bed. We're, you know, it's a completely separate relationship. And I think that's an important feature of supervision. It's protected in that sense.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's totally different. Go on, Joan.
Kirsty, I'm sorry. I think Nick's made a really good point in the chat there. I hope you don't mind if I just call it out.
No, go for it.
Missing the point. HR is not qualified counsel, and both things are very different. He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that is actually the point. We're not as HR professionals. I know I'm a qualified counsellor. Claire, you've got a counselling qualification, and Joe, I know you're a clinical psychologist. We happen, but no. Generally speaking, HR are not qualified to deal with this, but yet we're expected to know how to deal with that emotional burden that's being presented to us, and so. That's absolutely spot on. And one of the reasons, or probably a big driving reason why, as a counsellor, I particularly look to work with HR professionals, because I get it. I'm a HR professional and a qualified counsellor, so I can have that empathy in real terms. But it's absolutely right. No. HR are not qualified counsellors, therapists, coaches, clinical psychologists. And there are certain skills that we said at the beginning that do cross over.
Yeah.
But
no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I always think about, you know, I did a coaching qualification. It cost me £6,000. There's a reason for that. You know, it's exactly. you can't just like, oh yeah, today I'm going to act like a coach. Today I'm going to act like a counsellor. Today I'm going to act like a supervisor. It's like, no, that was 6 months of my life and a lot of money. And, you know, there's a reason for
4
that.
years I took to qualify as a counsellor.
That's a bigger deal than coaching. Yeah, absolutely.
I think same point.
And just out of interest, to those of you that are listening, just put in the chat if you have ever been asked to have a conversation at work in your job that you don't think you're actually qualified to do. This is to Nick's point about not being qualified counselling. I'd be very surprised if any of you have never been asked to kind
Can we put in the chat as well?
My hand
Can we answer that?
If you've ever been expected to be a counsellor or a coach or a psychologist or anything when you're not actually qualified to do it, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not expecting anyone to go, no, that's never happened to me. I only ever talk about hiring, firing, and performance reviews. Not going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, Matthew's saying.
Can you see these comments coming through? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I would
Matthew
say it's another reason why supervision is useful, because I think it's there to support people to be clear about their realms of competence and to set clear boundaries around that. And I think that that doesn't happen because of these expectations unspoken. My dog's barking in the background.
I was going to say, somebody's got a dog that doesn't sound like a giant Rottweiler. It's a small
We've
dog.
got drilling, we've got the dog. So I think there's that expectation, which again is an unrealistic and unacceptable expectation, but it's still there. So it's like, here you go, you deal with this. Yeah. And I think supervision can be really helpful, and it certainly is in the work that I'm doing with people, to support an HR professional to go, actually, yes, I can do this bit, I can have a conversation with someone, I can signpost them, I can let them know that we've got mental health first aid or whatever it is, but I can't do anything beyond that, that to set clear boundaries around what is their realm of competence, and to say no to the rest of it. I think that's what a function that supervision, serves.
It's really funny, really, because I can remember, like, many years ago, I was a pension trustee, but I was very, very clear, and it was part of my training for that I was not allowed to give pensions advice or enter into a conversation that might constitute any kind of financial or pensions advice. And that was rammed home to me. Yeah. But when it comes to emotional stuff, say what you want, Kirst. Knock yourself out, you know? It's really funny, isn't it? It's like one of those I could end up in prison.
Yeah.
But the actual impact of giving terrible advice in an emotional situation could be life or death.
Absolutely.
Could be catastrophic.
Yeah. I don't think I'm being dramatic, but so let me give you a hypothetical. And Claire, I'm gonna come to you first on this one. So if we were to reframe HR as the emotional first responders in an organization, what do you think would change in how HR is supported?
Oof, what a question. Thank you, Kirsty.
Let's ask you that one first.
So I think there's a couple of facets to that. I think that there's and someone else put it in the chat actually, and it's way down, so I don't know who it was that said it, sorry, about, you know, that needing to kind of rebrand HR. Yeah. I think if we reframe, so if our profession reframes it, I think that's my answer would be very different than it would be asking businesses to reframe it. I think there's a big difference. I think that we know this shit. You know, I've done 25 plus years. Obviously, you've all got big HR careers. It's not my first rodeo. It's absolutely not my first rodeo. So I know the emotional impact that it has on the career that I'd like to say chose me, but ultimately it was my choice, right? So I think there's something around if we reframe it, I think there's a risk that if we reframe it, then we are almost saying, well, that's our role, and we will accept all the emotional trauma. Yeah. We're almost, and we. I think there's a real danger, and it kind of frightens me a bit actually to go. If we reframe it as we're the emotional first responders, it's not our job. It's not our job. You know, so this, like I say, someone put in down the chat about, let's rebrand HR, and I'm like, it's not our job. You know, we're not qualified. That's not the role of HR. If you want emotional first responders, get supervisors, get counselors, get people who are clinically trained and qualified and experienced to be able to deal with that level of emotional impact. And that's my fear, is if that we rebrand HR as being the emotional first responders, that we actually dilute all the amazing work that we do that isn't all emotional. Actually, a lot of it is about other stuff. Is the commerciality, is the culture, is the engagement. It isn't about tick boxes, policies, pensions, all that kind of stuff. Yes, that's part of it, but the amount of value that we add to businesses that is invisible, unseen, if we get relabeled, renamed, reframed, I just think the risk is massive on our profession in terms of the emotional impact and the detrimental impact on our emotional, physical, mental and spiritual resilience. They're all connected. So we're talking about emotional impact, but we are human beings. We are whole people, which is why I've got a non-negotiable with my clients, is that I'm a whole person coach. Don't come to me because you just want career coaching. Don't come. I'm not the person, because I can't separate. I believe it's all blended together. I know people that focus and specialize in those areas. I specialize in people as whole humans. And it's one of the areas that I think we will reduce the fact that businesses will recognize us as human beings first. And that's the issue. So I've got a very similar story to yours, Joanne. My mum died very suddenly in 2016. At the same time that I was a HR business partner, I had 2 terminally ill employees that I was supporting. My own mum, like that, went. She wasn't ill. It was just like that overnight, over Easter as well. I was doing a parallel TUPE and redundancy program, plus my business as usual, plus my projects that I was full of passion for, that I was trying to kind of be engaged in. And all those things happened at the same time. And I commando rolled back into work after the Good Friday. My mother only died on the Thursday, and it was bank holiday either side of Easter. And I commando rolled back in because I was like, oh no, I need to hear the appeals, and their life was kind of more important almost than mine in that moment. And I just think it really scares me that we're going, hang on a second, it feels like a step back. It's not our job. It's not our job. And actually, let's reframe the role and the expectations, starting with ourselves, which is, hey, why the strapline of my business is everything starts with you. If I'm not okay, nothing around me is okay. And that's the fact. And we are humans first. Forget all the other roles that we wear, all the other hats, whether we're HR or something else. We are HR first. I was going to say then. We are human beings first. We all have families. We all have our health. We all have fears. We all have beliefs and values. And because we choose to wear that HR hat, if you like, none of that goes away. We still have all those things. So that's kind of my view. And I think reframing it no one will suddenly give us more support. Is my personal belief.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
but I'm conscious
not
of
emotional
time.
first responders.
No, that's fair. So I'm conscious of time, and the next question, the final question I'm going to ask actually answers Heidi's question, which is, so how would you get a supervisor? Joe, I want to come to you on this. So how would somebody identify a suitably qualified supervisor? Because it can be a bit of a minefield out there. So just talk us through that. And are there many people doing it? Like,
I think it is. I think it is a minefield, and I think that we might assume that those professions in which supervision is already embedded would be trained supervisors themselves, but they're not. So we can't assume that if someone is a trained counsellor, for example, or psychotherapist or social worker, that they have also been trained as a supervisor. They might have received supervision, but they won't necessarily have been trained as a supervisor. And I think my profession, clinical psychology, is one of the only professions that embeds the training of supervision methods and approaches into its core competencies. So, you come out of training as having trained in supervision techniques, and you immediately then also go on a program of post-qualification training in supervision. So I think the short answer is ask. Ask explicitly. If you're looking for someone to deliver supervision to you or your team or whatever, don't just assume because they're a counsellor or a psychotherapist or whatever that they are experienced in supervision. Ask them if they've had specific training in supervision. And currently, as it stands, there is no single kind of accrediting body or professional body of supervisors. So it's not like you can go somewhere to a professional body and find a sort of membership list of people who are accredited supervisors. It doesn't exist. So I would say ask explicitly, what is your training in supervision? Because it's really important that people have done that training. There are models that are specific and approaches that are specific to supervision. So being a coach or a psychotherapist doesn't equip you necessarily to be a supervisor.
That said, I have put Joe's LinkedIn link further down the conversation, and Joe is a qualified supervisor. So if anybody would like to have a conversation with Joe, you can look her up on LinkedIn. But are you aware of many other people doing it for HR professionals? Have any of you come across?
And this is what I was saying earlier. So when I years ago sort of started to think, why is HR not getting their own supervision? And at the time, I Googled it. I couldn't find anybody. And I think I was saying a few years ago, I come across Joe's name, and that's about it. And still, I don't think that there's anybody else at the moment that's actually doing the supervision. I mean, so when I came back to it again years later and thought, I thought, come back to it again, there was Joe still in the space, and in fact sort of resurrecting it again, weren't you, Joe, about revisiting what you'd identified a few years ago. And then I think we chatted, didn't we? And we were like, you've got to find, you fired it up again and all that kind of stuff. And no, there's not. And so perhaps in a short term, whilst ever we can get banging this drum, and hopefully people will maybe turn to supervision to take the proper qualification. Joe's absolutely 100% right. You have to be qualified in this. I'm a qualified counsellor. I'm not a qualified supervisor, but that could be an interim. So recognising you might need to get some support from counsellor or from a coach for a specific issue might be a great place to start. And then, like Claire experienced, once you've exhausted that model, that mode of therapy, then, you know, perhaps then being referred to a supervisor or the next, or whatever it might be. What we're saying is there is opportunity out there for people to offer this level of emotional support through safe spaces, counselling, coaching, and supervision. It's there. We just got to keep shouting about it, haven't we? To say it's there, and actually reach out for it. It's okay to reach out for it.
Yeah, it's something that I'm going to continue to push in Evolving HR and continue to talk to Jo about. And, you know, as and when more people start to do this, I want to make sure that, you know, people are aware that that's somewhere that they can go. But yeah, I would. Sorry, Claire, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's about having it in your toolkit as a non-negotiable. So some people go to the gym, it's a non-negotiable. Some people do a C-dip, it's a non-negotiable. Some people have Reiki, non-negotiable. So they have things in their toolkit to help them be a well-being. Clinical supervision should absolutely be in there. Without it's like a non-negotiable for me. And like I say, I've got my coach because I'm a supervision as a coach. That's not the same as the supervision I get as clinical supervision. And I'm really fortunate actually that my clinical supervisor, who I did start with CBT, his background was HR. That's how he started his original career. So that is just complete coincidence. So I can actually talk to him about stuff and he gets it. He gets the HR profession. So I think that's the added benefit, because there are people who are supervisors and provide clinical supervision that don't have that. It's a bit like, you know, anyone can go on Udemy and do a coach qualification for $12.99 and suddenly become a coach, right? Well, you know, I coach HR because I've had a 25-year experience and knowledge and expertise in that field. So I think it's about, you know, making sure, really, like you've just said, Dr. Jo, about, you know, asking the questions, what do they know, asking for a recommendation. So, you know, I don't know if you, Kirsty, still have supervision, but there's certainly 3 of us have all said, yeah, we still have, you know, we have supervision. So ask one of us, like ask someone you know that is receiving clinical supervision, you know, who they would recommend, because if their experience is something beneficial and it's in their toolkit, then they're going to happily shout about it.
Brilliant. And on that note, I will finish up for the day. This has been really, really interesting conversation, and the comments in the chat have really helped to kind of, I knew that this was an important conversation. I knew that people needed to hear this, and all of you that have been on the call and have been commenting in the chat have kind of backed that up for me. So it's definitely something that I think we need to keep shouting about. But thank you very much to my lovely panel.
Thank you for hosting it, Kirsten.
Thank you for bringing the subject to life. Thank you.
No, we will keep doing it. Absolutely. So yes, thank you. I will get the recording uploaded to the app tomorrow morning. And anybody who didn't make it or wasn't able to stay will be able to watch it through there. So thanks again. And,
thank you, guys.
Hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thanks all.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.